I think that the thing about reconciliation is not just that the politicians in our country have used a fundamentally biblical concept to inject into it a particular political understanding that in the end benefited the rich and the powerful and those who desire wealth and power, and left our people behind. But the difficulty is also that those of us from in the church who understood the demands of the gospel with regard to reconciliation left the politicians alone to do whatever they wanted, and we stood on the side. If we say that our reconciliation process is in trouble, it is because of politics, but it is also because the church decided to leave her prophetic calling behind and to remain silent in one of the most crucial periods of our nation's history. And that is part of the thing that we will have to deal with in this new conversation about reconciliation, race, apartheid, and a different kind of imagination for our people and for our nation. Let me begin by saying that I believe that for Christians, reconciliation is not an option. It is not as if we can say, we will look at it, we will weigh the pros and the cons, we will think about it, we will twist it a little bit until it suits our particular needs and our particular interests. We have no option. We have the gospel that tells us that we are called to the ministry of reconciliation. That the ministry of reconciliation has been entrusted to us by God through Jesus Christ. That is our fundamental point of departure. We also know that South Africa had almost none of the requirements that the gospel gives us as far as reconciliation is concerned. Our choice, though, despite the problems, for reconciliation, rather than continued conflict, rather than reaching towards a civil war that would destroy us all, rather than staying within the trenches of confrontation and violence, that choice for reconciliation is the right choice. That I believe with all my heart. Especially if we think of reconciliation as the process of fundamental transformation of persons, of communities, and society. That is something we cannot do without. But in the Bible, we know, and we should have said so when we remained silent in those first years of the 1990s, when this church that was so prophetically engaged and faithful during the struggle and carved out for itself a space in that struggle, even some points of leadership in that struggle, when that church, for some reason, decided that we would remain silent, that no longer would be as clear and as honest in our prophetic witness towards the new government in the new dispensation as we were towards the old apartheid government and the old apartheid dispensation. For some reason, we became so mesmerized with Mr. Mandela that we became totally disenchanted with Jesus. And that is an issue that we have to deal with before we deal with the politicians. In the Bible, we know, but we did not say so, that reconciliation is not an otherworldly, sentimental concept, drifting above the realities of this world. But we know from the Apostle Paul, and we know from Jesus, and the story of Zacchaeus in the Gospel of Luke, that biblical reconciliation is real, it is radical, and it is revolutionary, or it is not reconciliation at all. We never said that to our people. We did not remind the nation when the politicians were having the debate about truth and reconciliation, that reconciliation is the most desirable thing for our nation, but that reconciliation is not possible without honest confrontation. Confrontation with the past, with the evil of the past, with the evil of our present, and confrontation with the evil within ourselves, including that evil which denies the evil that exists, because the evil that exists benefits us. Reconciliation is not possible as a process that papers over the cracks. Reconciliation is not possible without repentance. And I'm talking about political repentance and personal repentance. And I'm talking about repentance not just as the mere admission of guilt, but repentance that is taking responsibility for the injury that has been caused, that holds people accountable for what has been done to children of God who were weaker than they, whom they have oppressed and exploited and dominated. Reconciliation is not possible without restitution. I'm not one who speaks much of reparations. You can have your reparations and keep that. I'm asking the question, what about restitution? Reconciliation is not possible without forgiveness, and reconciliation is not possible without justice. If we are honest with ourselves, we will have to admit that we hardly ever have had any serious and honest confrontation with our past. We acted as if the mere mention of the word reconciliation and one speech from a balcony would wipe out the past without us ever dealing with what it meant, and how the past continues to cast a shadow over both our present and our future. We never really talked about the meaning of forgiveness, even though we created a space for political forgiveness at Kempton Park, and we embraced that. We created space for personal forgiveness in front of the Amnesty Commission, and we embraced that. We created space for communal forgiveness when Nelson Mandela, on behalf of all oppressed people, said that we will offer forgiveness to those who oppressed us for over 350 years. But we never asked the question, what does forgiveness mean? And what does forgiveness require? And for us, forgiveness became a different word for one of the most famous and beloved South African expressions since 1994. We have to move on. And I think that unless we begin a new conversation about what it means going back to our understanding from the heart of the gospel about reconciliation and about forgiveness and about repentance, we will never be able to move on. We will remain caught up in the past, and we will not be able to talk to each other in a way that will take this country forward. We talk of restorative justice, but we avoided socio-economic, truly distributed justice. We have no restoration of justice, of dignity, and of hope for the majority of our people. And we created space for that. In Kempton Park, we made the choice against Nuremberg trials because we embraced the concept of a political justice that would help us lay a foundation for all of us together. We refused to speak in terms of criminal justice and of punishment, even though we knew that apartheid has been declared a crime against humanity. Not just those who perpetrated those criminal acts, but those who benefited from those acts as well, according to the Statute of Rome, in which this is described. Not only that, we stepped away from criminal justice, and we said we would instead also embrace political justice. We said no to victor's justice, even though we won the battle against apartheid, although not against racism. And that is a conversation that we should have, my brother. Because that's one of the things that makes me excited when I come home and I hear it. Dan weet ek nie, is toe kom en praat met Afrikaans en die mense met kan verstaan. Because in that speech that we did at the launch of the United Democratic Front, this question was actually raised. And I embroidered on this question at UWC in 2008 at the 25th anniversary of the United Democratic Front. But that would be one of the conversations I would love to share with you, since we are both children of the Black Consciousness Movement. So we said no to victor's justice. We also said no to victim's justice. We could have claimed, if we wished, 350 years of victimhood. Instead, what we now talk about is about a new kind of white victimhood without ever having dealt with the reality of black pain and black suffering and black oppression in the way that we should have. We need something more. Instead of talking about any of that, and this is the phrase of political scientist Mahmoud Mandani from Makerere University in Uganda, we said let's talk about survivors' justice, not victims' justice, not victims' justice, not criminal justice, not retributive justice, but survivor justice. And by that we meant that all of us South Africans, white people and black people, have in a way survived apartheid. We have survived the disaster and the horrors of over 350 years, and white people survived the inhumanity they inflicted upon us, in which they also inflicted that same inhumanity upon themselves, although they did not know it. And we said all of us survived apartheid, and as survivors of apartheid, is that a foundation upon which we can come together and build that collective memory that Professor Host was talking about, and build and shape a new future for all of us and our children and our grandchildren. What we usually miss and what we almost never talk about, and what I don't hear people say enough in this country, is what this meant is an enormous act of magnanimity on the side of the oppressed population of this country. And if you pose that over against questions like forgiveness, what for, that we have heard so often, then we realize how far we are from a proper understanding of reconciliation. I contend that it would have helped enormously if the church, in its prophetic voice, had been willing to raise these questions in those debates. Reconciliation is something we have no choice in. It is our calling. I think we can begin this new discussion about reconciliation if we indeed return to this faith that we had that sustained us through so many years of struggle. We can begin this discussion if we give proper space to the hope that the gospel brings in any situation, what we understood then as the spirituality of struggle. That means that we will no longer look at the world and at our situation and at each other from a human point of view. Paul says that. But we would look at each other with new eyes and new understanding. We would look at each other not as we see each other now as this generation, but look at each other as our children should look at themselves and at each other 50, 20, 100 years from now. If we can do that, then I think we have a proper basis for a new conversation, because a new conversation is necessary. But that means that the church should once again have the courage to stand up and show to whom we belong. And that begins not in Parliament, although Parliament may benefit from it. It begins not even in the streets, even though it might show in the protests that we hold in the streets. But it begins with ourselves, but it never remains with ourselves. Worship of God in the sanctuary means worshiping God in the streets of protest and in the shaping of a new future. I hope that tonight's conversation will help us and bring us closer to that kind of engagement with ourselves and with our past and with our future. Thank you.